Captain Sarah Chun adjusted her helmet one final time before climbing into the cockpit of her F-16 Fighting Falcon. The morning sun cast long shadows across the runway at Forward Operating Base Phoenix, located deep in the mountainous region where three hostile nations met. She had been stationed here for 8 months, flying reconnaissance missions and providing air support for ground operations in one of the most dangerous territories on Earth. The mission briefing had been routine until Colonel Marcus Webb, the base commander, received an urgent communication. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was being transported through the valley below, a captured Allied general who had been missing for 3 weeks. The enemy convoy was moving fast, heading toward the border where extraction would become impossible. Sarah checked her instruments methodically. Fuel levels full, weapons systems armed, radio frequency set to the tactical channel. At 28 years old, she had already accumulated more flight hours in combat zones than pilots twice her age. Her father had been a Marine pilot in Vietnam, and flying was literally in her blood. But today felt different. Something in the air made her instincts sharper than usual. Phoenix 1, this is Tower. You're cleared for takeoff. Good hunting out there. The air traffic controller's voice crackled through her headset. Sarah pushed the throttle forward and felt the familiar surge of power as her aircraft accelerated down the runway. Within seconds, she was airborne, climbing rapidly toward her assigned altitude of 20,000 feet. Below her, the rugged landscape stretched endlessly. Rocky peaks, deep valleys, and narrow roads that snaked through terrain so treacherous that ground forces could barely navigate it. Her mission was straightforward: locate the enemy convoy, assess the situation, and provide intelligence for a ground rescue operation that was already mobilizing. What she didn't know was that Colonel Webb himself had decided to lead the rescue mission personally, against direct orders from his superiors. The captured general was his closest friend from their academy days, and Webb wasn't about to let politics interfere with bringing him home. As Sarah reached her patrol altitude, she activated her targeting systems and began scanning the valley below. The enemy territory was known for its sophisticated air defense network, including shoulder-fired missiles and radar-guided artillery. Every pilot who flew these missions understood they were essentially flying into a hornet's nest with limited backup and even more limited escape routes. Phoenix 1, this is ground control. We're tracking multiple hostile aircraft approaching your sector from the northeast. 3 bogies flying low and fast. Estimated time to contact, 12 minutes. The warning came through her radio with unsettling clarity. Sarah's pulse quickened, but her training kicked in immediately. She banked her aircraft toward the northeast and activated her air-to-air radar system. 3 aircraft appeared on her scope. Older model MiG-21s, but still deadly in experienced hands. They were flying in a standard attack formation, clearly hunting for her. The tactical situation was becoming complicated rapidly. Not only did she need to locate the convoy with the captured general, but now she had to deal with enemy fighters while flying alone in hostile airspace. Standard protocol would be to call for backup and retreat to a safer altitude, but backup was at least 30 minutes away, and the convoy would be across the border long before help arrived. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Instead of retreating, she descended to 500 feet above the valley floor, using the terrain to mask her approach while simultaneously hunting for both the convoy and preparing to engage the enemy aircraft. Flying this low in mountainous terrain was incredibly dangerous, but it was her only chance to accomplish both objectives. Her radar warning receiver suddenly came alive with alarm tones. The enemy fighters had locked onto her position and were closing fast. Sarah jinked hard to the right, pulling her aircraft into a steep climbing turn that pressed her deep into her ejection seat. The G-forces made her vision blur temporarily, but she maintained control and leveled off behind a ridge line that temporarily blocked the enemy's line of sight. Contact, 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 she transmitted to ground control. 3 hostile fighters engaging. I'm defensive, but maintaining mission parameters. The first MiG appeared over the ridgeline like a shark breaking the surface of the ocean. Sarah had positioned herself perfectly for an ambush. She acquired a lock with her AIM-120 missile and fired without hesitation. The missile streaked away from her aircraft, leaving a thin trail of white smoke as it tracked towards target. The enemy pilot never saw it coming. The MiG erupted in a brilliant orange fireball that lit up the valley below. Debris scattered across the rocky landscape as Sarah banked hard to avoid the explosion and immediately began hunting for the remaining two fighters. But the other enemy pilots were experienced and had learned from their wingman's mistake. They split up, forcing Sarah to choose which threat to engage while leaving herself vulnerable to attack from the other. This was exactly the kind of tactical situation that separated good pilots from dead pilots. Sarah chose to go after the MiG that was climbing to gain altitude advantage. She pulled her nose up and fired her second missile, but the enemy pilot was ready. He released flares and chaff while executing a violent defensive maneuver that caused her missile to lose lock and detonate harmlessly in the sky. The third enemy fighter was now positioning himself for a shot at Sarah from below. She could see the muzzle flashes from his cannon as he opened fire, sending streams of tracer rounds racing past her cockpit. Sarah pushed her aircraft into a vertical dive, using gravity to increase her speed while simultaneously making herself a more difficult target. The valley floor was rushing toward her at an alarming rate. At the last possible second, she pulled out of the dive and leveled off just 50 feet above the ground, flying so low that she had to constantly adjust her altitude to avoid hitting trees and rock formations. Behind her, she could hear the whine of jet engines as both remaining enemy fighters followed her into the valley. That's when she saw it. A small convoy of military vehicles moving along a dirt road that wound through the valley floor. 3 trucks and 2 armored vehicles, exactly matching the intelligence description of the unit transporting the captured general. Sarah had found her primary objective, but she was still being hunted by 2 enemy fighters who were determined to shoot her down. She had to make another impossible decision: engage the fighters and risk losing the convoy, or focus on the convoy and hope she could survive the air-to-air combat long enough to complete her mission. There was no good answer, but Sarah had never been the type of person to choose the easy path. Flying barely above the treetops, she activated her targeting pod and began gathering intelligence on the convoy while simultaneously monitoring the enemy fighters on her radar. The lead vehicle was definitely an armored personnel carrier, exactly the type used for transporting high-value prisoners. If the captured general was anywhere, he would be in that vehicle. The first MiG was lining up for another attack run when Sarah executed a maneuver that defied both logic and physics. She pulled her aircraft into a vertical climb that brought her face-to-face with her attacker, playing a deadly game of chicken at 500 miles per hour. At the last second, she rolled inverted and fired her cannon in a burst that lasted less than 2 seconds but found its mark. The enemy fighter disintegrated in a shower of metal and flame. Sarah's aircraft shook from the turbulence of flying through the explosion, but her systems remained operational. 1 enemy fighter left, and she was still over the convoy. But her fuel was running low, her ammunition was nearly depleted, and the remaining enemy pilot was smart enough to keep his distance while waiting for reinforcements that were probably already on the way. Sarah needed to end this engagement quickly and somehow signal the location of the convoy to the rescue team. She switched to the emergency frequency and transmitted in the clear, knowing the enemy would hear every word. Any friendly forces, this is Phoenix 1. I have visual contact with the package at grid reference 4-7-2-8-5-6. Convoy moving southeast toward border checkpoint Alpha, requesting immediate ground support. The response came from Colonel Webb himself. Phoenix 1, this is Rescue Actual. We're 20 minutes out from your position. Can you maintain visual contact? 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Sarah's fuel gauges were showing red. The remaining enemy fighter was still stalking her, and She had just broadcast the convoy's location on an open channel that every enemy monitoring station in the region had probably intercepted. But she had given her word, and Sarah Chun had never broken a promise in her life. Roger, rescue actual. I'll keep them honest until you arrive, she transmitted back, fully understanding that she was essentially committing to a suicide mission. The last enemy fighter made his move, diving from high altitude in an attempt to catch Sarah while she was focused on the convoy. But Sarah had been expecting this attack. She waited until the MiG was committed to its dive, then executed a split-S maneuver that brought her aircraft directly underneath her attacker's flight path. From this position, she could see the pilot in the enemy cockpit. He was young, probably not much older than herself, and he looked surprised to find her aircraft suddenly appearing below him. Sarah felt a moment of regret for what she was about to do, but war didn't allow for hesitation. Her cannon burst was perfect. The enemy fighter's engine exploded in a geyser of flame and black smoke. The aircraft began spinning toward the ground, but Sarah saw the pilot eject successfully. His parachute deployed, and he would probably survive to fight another day. Sarah hoped he would make better choices about the wars he chose to participate in. But her victory was short-lived. Her fuel warning light was now flashing continuously, and she could see additional enemy aircraft on the horizon, at least 6 more fighters heading directly toward her position. The convoy had stopped moving and was deploying defensive positions, probably because they had heard her radio transmissions and realized their location had been compromised. Sarah had made her final impossible decision of the day. Instead of retreating to a safe altitude and waiting for rescue, she descended even lower and began making strafing runs against the convoy's defensive positions. Her remaining ammunition was limited, but every shot had to count. The captured general's life depended on disrupting the enemy's defensive preparations before the rescue team arrived. Her first pass destroyed one of the escort vehicles and scattered the infantry who had been setting up a perimeter. Her second pass targeted the communications vehicle, effectively blinding the convoy to incoming threats. On her third pass, her ammunition ran out, but she continued making low-level runs over the enemy positions, using the psychological effect of a fighter aircraft to keep the enemy soldiers pinned down and unable to organize an effective defense. The fuel situation was becoming critical. Sarah's engines were running on fumes, and she was still 15 minutes away from the nearest friendly airfield. But Colonel Webb's rescue team was finally visible on the horizon, 3 helicopters flying in combat formation, escorted by 2 Apache gunships that immediately engaged the approaching enemy fighters. Sarah stayed on station until the last possible moment, providing real-time intelligence to the rescue team as they approached the convoy's position. When her fuel gauges finally hit 0, she transmitted her final message. Rescue actual, Phoenix 1 is Winchester and Bingo fuel. The package is in the lead vehicle. Good luck, and bring him home. Her engines flamed out simultaneously as she pulled into a climbing turn toward the nearest emergency landing site. Sarah Chun had accomplished the impossible. She had located the captured general, eliminated 3 enemy fighters single-handedly, and provided cover for the rescue operation until help arrived. Now all she had to do was survive the landing. The mountains below looked unforgiving as her aircraft began its unpowered descent toward an uncertain fate. But Sarah Chun had always been the type of person who made her own luck, and today was not going to be the day that luck ran out. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision across the cockpit controls as her F-16 glided silently through the mountain air. Without engine power, the aircraft had become essentially a very fast, very heavy glider. She had perhaps 8 minutes to find a suitable landing site before the laws of physics would make the decision for her. Below, the rescue operation was unfolding exactly as planned. Colonel Webb's helicopters had reached the convoy's position, and the Apache gunships were engaging the newly arrived enemy fighters with devastating effectiveness. Explosions bloomed across the valley floor as the rescue team fought to extract the captured general from the armored personnel carrier. Sarah scanned the landscape ahead, searching for anything that might serve as an emergency landing strip. The terrain was unforgiving, rocky outcroppings, dense forest, and steep slopes that would tear her aircraft apart on impact. But there, about 5 miles to the northeast, she spotted something that might work, a small plateau that appeared relatively flat and long enough to accommodate an emergency landing. Her radio crackled with concerned voices as other aircraft began monitoring her emergency frequency. Phoenix 1, this is Rescue 3. We're tracking your position. Are you able to reach the emergency strip at grid reference 4-8-1-9-2-2? Sarah quickly calculated the distance and her current rate of descent. It was going to be close, but she might be able to make it if she managed her energy perfectly. Rescue 3, Phoenix 1. I'm attempting to reach that position. Estimate 3 minutes to touchdown. What she didn't tell them was that even if she reached the plateau, landing a fighter jet without power on an unprepared surface was only marginally better than crashing into a mountainside. The survival statistics for dead-stick landings in hostile territory were not encouraging, but Sarah had never been particularly impressed by statistics. As she approached the plateau, Sarah could see that it was even more challenging than it had appeared from a distance. The surface was covered with loose rocks and scattered boulders, and there was a significant slope that would either help her decelerate quickly or cause her aircraft to tumble end over end. She would have exactly one chance to get this right. Sarah lowered her landing gear and flaps, then focused entirely on her approach angle and airspeed. Too fast, and she would overrun the available space and crash into the rocks beyond. Too slow, and she would stall and fall out of the sky like a brick. The margin for error was essentially zero. Her aircraft touched down hard on the rocky surface, bouncing twice before the landing gear found traction. Sarah immediately deployed her drag chute and applied maximum braking, feeling her aircraft slow dramatically as it rolled across the uneven ground. Rocks and debris pelted her canopy as the fighter jet gradually came to a stop just 50 yards from the edge of a cliff that would have meant certain death. For a moment, Sarah sat in her cockpit, breathing heavily and running through her post-landing checklist. All systems were shut down, her engine temperatures were dropping toward normal ranges, and she was alive. Against all reasonable expectations, she had successfully executed an emergency landing in enemy territory and lived to tell about it. But her situation was far from resolved. She was now a downed pilot deep in hostile territory, with limited survival equipment and no immediate prospect of rescue. The plateau where she had landed was exposed and visible from several directions, making it unsuitable for a long-term hiding place. Sarah needed to move quickly and find better concealment before enemy ground forces began searching for her. She gathered her survival gear, armed herself with her service pistol, and carefully climbed out of her aircraft. The mountain air was thin and cold, carrying the sounds of distant explosions from the valley below where the rescue operation was still in progress. Sarah could see smoke rising from multiple locations, indicating that the battle was far from over. Her survival radio crackled to life. Any station, this is Phoenix 1 on guard frequency. I'm down, but alive at emergency landing site. Request guidance and extraction when possible. The response came from an unexpected source. Phoenix 1, this is Rescue Actual. Good to hear your voice. We've secured the package and are extracting now, but we're taking heavy fire from reinforcements moving into the area. Can you find concealment and maintain radio contact? Colonel Webb's voice was strained, and Sarah could hear gunfire and rotor noise in the background. The rescue operation had been successful, but now they were fighting their way out of the valley with the captured general. Sarah realized that her emergency had become secondary to the larger tactical situation. Roger, Rescue Actual. I'm mobile and seeking concealment. We'll maintain radio watch on this frequency, Sarah transmitted back, already moving away from her aircraft toward a cluster of large boulders that offered both protection and camouflage. As she reached the boulder field, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching her position. For a moment, she felt a surge of hope that rescue was imminent. But as the aircraft came into view, she realized they were not friendly forces. Two enemy helicopters were conducting a search pattern, obviously looking for her downed fighter. Sarah pressed herself deep into the shadows between two large rocks and activated the emergency beacon locator on her survival radio, setting it to transmit only to friendly frequencies. If rescue forces were going to find her, they needed to know her exact position. But that same signal could potentially be detected by enemy forces equipped with the right monitoring equipment. The enemy helicopters circled the plateau methodically, their crews obviously searching for any sign of the downed pilot. Sarah could hear their rotor noise growing louder as they approached her hiding place. She drew her pistol and chamber around, knowing that if they discovered her position, she would have to fight her way out with very limited ammunition and no backup. One of the helicopters settled into a hover directly above her hiding place, so close that the rotor wash was throwing dust and small rocks in every direction. Sarah could see the door gunner leaning out of the aircraft, scanning the ground below with binoculars. If he looked in exactly the right direction, he would spot her immediately. For several terrifying minutes, the helicopter remained in position while its crew conducted a detailed search of the boulder field. Sarah remained perfectly motionless, barely breathing, as enemy soldiers rappelled down ropes to begin a ground search. She counted 4 troops, all armed with automatic weapons, and moving with the professional competence of Special Operations Forces. The soldiers were methodical and thorough, checking every possible hiding place in the immediate area. Sarah realized that discovery was inevitable unless she took action. But engaging 4 enemy soldiers with only a pistol was a losing proposition, especially with helicopter support overhead. That's when she remembered the emergency flares in her survival kit. Each flare burned at over 2,000 degrees and could serve as both a distraction and a weapon if used correctly. Sarah waited until the nearest soldier was about 20 feet from her position, then pulled the pin on 2 flares simultaneously. The brilliant red light and thick smoke created instant chaos among the search team. Sarah threw both flares in opposite directions, then immediately moved to a new position while the enemy soldiers were temporarily blinded and confused. The helicopter crew was shouting instructions over their radio, but the smoke was too thick for them to provide effective support. Sarah used the confusion to move deeper into the boulder field, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the search team. But she knew this was only a temporary respite. Once the flares burned out, the search would resume with increased intensity. Her radio provided the next surprise. Phoenix 1, this is Guardian Angel. We're a flight of 2 A-10s, 5 minutes out from your position. Can you mark your location for close air support? Sarah almost laughed with relief. The A-10 Thunderbolt was specifically designed for close air support in exactly this type of situation. If she could guide them on a target, the enemy helicopters and ground troops would be eliminated quickly and efficiently. Guardian Angel, Phoenix 1. Enemy helicopters and ground troops searching my immediate area. I can mark my position with infrared strobe for your targeting systems. How copy? Phoenix 1, Guardian Angel lead. Roger, we have your emergency beacon and are acquiring infrared strobes. Stay low and stay covered. This is going to get loud very quickly. Sarah activated her infrared strobe beacon, making herself visible to friendly aircraft equipped with night vision systems while remaining invisible to the enemy forces searching for her. She pressed herself even deeper in her hiding place and prepared for the inevitable violence that was about to unfold. The A-10s arrived like angels of destruction. Their distinctive engine sound announced their presence seconds before their 30mm cannons opened fire on the enemy helicopters. The first burst caught one helicopter while it was still hovering, turning the aircraft into a falling fireball that crashed into the mountainside with tremendous force. The second enemy helicopter tried to escape, but a 10 pilots were trained to kill aircraft attempting to flee. A stream of depleted uranium rounds from the second A-10 tore through the helicopter's engine compartment, causing it to auto-rotate heavily into the valley below. The enemy ground troops were now stranded without air support, but they were still dangerous and highly motivated to capture or kill the downed American pilot. Sarah could hear them coordinating their search over their radio communications, speaking in a language she didn't recognize, but with obvious tactical proficiency. Guardian Angel lead, Phoenix 1. Helicopter threats eliminated. For enemy ground troops still searching my area. They're approximately 100 meters southeast of my position and moving closer. Phoenix 1, Guardian Angel. Roger, we have thermal signatures on 4 personnel. Recommend you move to position behind the large boulder cluster to your northwest. We're going to engage the ground troops with precision munitions. Sarah immediately began moving toward the recommended position, staying low and using every available piece of cover. Behind her, she could hear the enemy soldiers advancing more cautiously now that their air support had been eliminated. But they were still coming, and they were still dangerous. The A-10's precision attack was swift and decisive. Sarah heard the whistle of small bombs falling through the air, followed by 4 sharp explosions that echoed across the mountainside. When the dust and smoke cleared, the enemy ground threat had been completely eliminated. Phoenix 1, Guardian Angel lead. Area is secure. We're going to orbit your position until extraction arrives. Rescue is inbound with an estimated arrival time of 12 minutes. For the first time since her aircraft had run out of fuel, Sarah allowed herself to believe that she might actually survive this situation. She had successfully crash-landed in enemy territory, evaded capture during a ground search, and guided friendly forces to eliminate the immediate threats. But the day was far from over. Her radio brought news about the primary mission. Phoenix 1, this is Rescue Actual. Package is secure, and we're clear of the immediate combat zone. The general is injured but stable and receiving medical attention. Your actions today made this mission possible. Outstanding work, Captain. Colonel Webb's words carried genuine emotion, but Sarah was more focused on her immediate situation than on praise for her performance. She was still deep in enemy territory, and extraction remained a complex and dangerous operation. The rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon exactly when promised, escorted by 2 Apache gunships that immediately began providing overwatch for the extraction operation. Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to move to the pickup zone when the helicopters signaled they were ready for her. But as the rescue helicopter approached her position, Sarah's radio erupted with alarm calls. Guardian Angel flight. Guardian Angel flight. This is AWACS control. Multiple bogies approaching from the north. Estimated 12 aircraft, all hostile. They're vectoring directly toward the extraction site. Sarah looked toward the northern horizon and saw them, a formation of enemy fighters approaching at high speed, obviously determined to prevent her rescue and possibly shoot down the rescue helicopter in the process. The day that had started with a routine reconnaissance mission was about to become the largest air battle she had ever witnessed. The approaching enemy aircraft formation created an immediate crisis for the extraction operation. 12 fighters against 2 A-10s, 2 Apache gunships, and 1 rescue helicopter was not favorable odds, especially considering that the rescue aircraft were not designed for air-to-air combat. Sarah realized that her extraction had become secondary to the survival of the entire rescue team. Guardian Angel lead, this is Phoenix 1. Recommend you abort the extraction and engage the incoming threats. I can wait for a better opportunity, Sarah transmitted, even though every survival instinct in her body screamed against volunteering to remain in enemy territory. Negative, Phoenix 1. We don't leave people behind. Rescue helicopter, this is Guardian Angel lead. Execute emergency extraction procedures. We'll buy you as much time as possible. The rescue helicopter pilot was obviously experienced in combat extractions under fire. Instead of the careful approach Sarah had been expecting, the aircraft dove toward her position in a steep, fast descent that would minimize its exposure time. The crew chief was already lowering the rescue hoist as the helicopter flared hard and settled into a hover just 20 feet above Sarah's position. Sarah grabbed the hoist hook and clipped it to her survival harness, then signaled the crew chief that she was ready for extraction. As she began rising toward the helicopter, she could see the enemy fighters approaching rapidly from the north. They were flying in two formations of 6 aircraft each, suggesting a level of tactical coordination that indicated these were not average pilots. The A-10s immediately turned to engage the incoming threat, but their mission was primarily ground attack, not air-to-air combat. Against 12 enemy fighters, they would be seriously outmatched. The Apache gunships were deadly against ground targets, but virtually helpless against fast-moving jets. Sarah realized that everyone involved in her rescue operation was now in mortal danger. As the rescue hoist pulled her up toward the helicopter, Sarah could see tracer rounds beginning to streak across the sky as the first enemy fighters engaged the A-10s. The distinctive sound of 30mm cannon fire mixed with the whine of jet engines and the characteristic thump of helicopter rotor blades. The battle was literally developing around her as she was being extracted. Sarah reached the helicopter door and was immediately pulled inside by the crew chief, an experienced sergeant who had obviously done this many times before. "Welcome aboard, Captain. We're getting out of here right now," he shouted over the noise of the aircraft and the ongoing air battle. But as the rescue helicopter began to accelerate away from the extraction site, it became clear that they were not going to escape easily. 2 of the enemy fighters had detached from the main formation and were pursuing the rescue aircraft with obvious intent to shoot it down. The helicopter's defensive systems were minimal, and outrunning jet fighters was impossible. "Rescue helicopter, this is Guardian Angel 2. We have 2 bogies on your 6 o'clock, closing fast. Execute evasive maneuvers and stay low. We're coming to assist." The helicopter pilot immediately dove toward the valley floor, using the mountainous terrain to mask the aircraft's radar signature and make it a more difficult target for the pursuing fighters. Sarah was pressed against the door gunner's position, watching the landscape blur past at terrifying speed as the helicopter skimmed just above the treetops. Behind them, one of the A-10s was trying to intercept the pursuing fighters, but the speed differential made it nearly impossible. The A-10 was designed for low-altitude, low-speed operations, while the enemy fighters could easily outmaneuver it in air-to-air combat. Sarah watched as cannon rounds from the lead enemy fighter began impacting the ground around the fleeing helicopter. "This is not going to work," Sarah told the crew chief. "They're going to catch us before we reach friendly airspace. We need to try something different." The crew chief looked at her with confusion. "Ma'am, with respect, you're the passenger now. Leave the tactical decisions to the air crew." But Sarah was already moving toward the helicopter's door-mounted machine gun. "Sergeant, I'm a fighter pilot with more combat experience than anyone else on this aircraft. Trust me when I say we need to change tactics immediately, or we're all going to die in the next 5 minutes." The helicopter pilot heard the conversation over the internal communications system and made a command decision. "Captain, this is your show. What do you recommend?" Sarah was already checking the machine gun's ammunition and mechanical condition. "We can't outrun them, so we need to make them think we're not worth chasing. Set us down in that clearing ahead and shut down the engines. Make it look like we've had a mechanical emergency." It was an insane plan, but the alternative was being shot down by enemy fighters with no chance of survival. The helicopter pilot executed a hard landing in the small clearing Sarah had indicated, immediately shutting down the engines and activating the emergency locator beacon to make the aircraft appear disabled. The pursuing enemy fighters overflew their position at high speed, apparently convinced that the helicopter had crashed or suffered a mechanical failure. But Sarah knew they would circle back for a closer look, and that's when she planned to spring her trap. "Everyone stay low and stay quiet," Sarah instructed the helicopter crew. "When they come back for a closer inspection, I'm going to try to bring one of them down with the door gun. It's not much of a plan, but it's better than running until they shoot us down." The crew chief looked at her with obvious skepticism. "Ma'am, You're talking about engaging jet fighters with a helicopter-mounted machine gun. That's not exactly standard tactics. Sarah was already positioning herself behind the door gun and adjusting its elevation and traverse mechanisms. Sergeant, nothing about today has been standard. Sometimes you have to make your own rules. The first enemy fighter reappeared about 2 minutes later, flying slow and low over their position to confirm the helicopter's status. The pilot was obviously confident that the aircraft was disabled and posed no threat. Sarah waited until the fighter was directly overhead and flying straight and level before opening fire. Her first burst caught the enemy aircraft in the engine intake, causing immediate and catastrophic damage. The fighter began trailing black smoke and losing altitude rapidly. Sarah tracked the aircraft with her machine gun, firing continuously until the enemy pilot ejected and his aircraft crashed into the mountainside. The second pursuing fighter immediately began an attack run on the helicopter, but Sarah had anticipated this reaction. As soon as she saw the enemy aircraft begin its dive, she directed the helicopter pilot to start the engines and take off immediately, while she continued providing suppressive fire against the attacking fighter. The helicopter lifted off just as cannon rounds began impacting their previous position. Sarah maintained continuous fire against the enemy fighter, forcing the pilot to break off his attack run and climb to a safer altitude. It wasn't much of a victory, but it bought them enough time to escape toward friendly territory. Guardian Angel lead. This is rescue helicopter. We're clear of immediate threat and heading home. Phoenix 1 is aboard and ready for debriefing. The helicopter pilot transmitted with obvious relief. But the air battle behind them was far from over. Sarah could see explosions and smoke trails across the sky as the remaining A-10s and Apache gunships continued engaging the enemy fighter formation. The odds were heavily against the friendly forces, but they were fighting with the desperation of people who knew that failure meant the loss of multiple aircraft and crews. Sarah's radio provided a running commentary on the battle as they flew towards safety. Guardian Angel 2 is taking hits. Guardian Angel 2 is going down. Apache 3 has multiple missile hits and is auto-rotating. This is Guardian Angel lead. I'm Winchester on missiles and low on ammunition. The rescue operation that had started with such promise was turning into a disaster. Multiple friendly aircraft were down or damaged, and Sarah realized that her extraction had cost far more than anyone had anticipated. The captured general had been rescued successfully, but the price in aircraft and potentially aircrew was devastating. As their helicopter crossed into friendly airspace, Sarah could see additional aircraft launching from forward operating base Phoenix. F-16s, F-15s, and more Apache gunships were scrambling to provide reinforcement for the ongoing battle. But for many of the aircrew already engaged, help would arrive too late. Phoenix 1, this is base operations. We're tracking your return flight and have medical standing by. Are you injured, and do you require immediate medical attention? Sarah keyed her microphone and realized that her voice was hoarse from shouting over the noise of combat. Base operations, Phoenix 1. I'm uninjured and ready for immediate debriefing, but we need to focus on supporting the aircraft still engaged with enemy forces. They're taking heavy casualties. The flight back to base gave Sarah time to process what had happened during the last several hours. She had accomplished her primary mission by locating the captured general and providing intelligence for his rescue. She had engaged and destroyed 3 enemy fighters in air-to-air combat. She had successfully executed an emergency landing in hostile territory and evaded capture during an enemy ground search. She had guided friendly forces to eliminate immediate threats and coordinated her own extraction under fire. But the cost of these accomplishments was becoming clear as damage reports continued streaming over the radio. 2 A-10s had been shot down, with 1 pilot confirmed killed and 1 missing in action. 1 Apache gunship had been destroyed with the loss of its entire crew. Multiple other aircraft had sustained significant battle damage and were limping back to base with wounded aircrew. Sarah began writing her after-action report mentally, knowing that every detail of the day's events would be scrutinized by intelligence analysts and tactical planners. The enemy had demonstrated capabilities and coordination that exceeded previous intelligence estimates. Their pilots were more skilled than anticipated, and their response time to the rescue operation suggested sophisticated command and control systems. As the helicopter approached Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Sarah could see the base hospital prepared for multiple casualties. Ambulances were staged near the landing pad, and medical teams were standing by to treat wounded aircrew from the ongoing battle. The successful rescue of the captured general was going to be overshadowed by the losses sustained during the operation. "Phoenix 1, welcome home," the crew chief said as the helicopter touched down on the landing pad. "Hell of a day's work, Captain." Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to face the debriefing sessions, medical examinations, and operational reports that would consume the next several hours. But her mind was still focused on the aircrew who remained engaged with enemy forces in the valley beyond the mountains. The day was far from over, and there were still people depending on the decisions being made in command centers and operations rooms. As she stepped off the helicopter, Sarah was met by Colonel Webb himself, who had returned from the successful rescue operation with the captured general. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, but he was smiling broadly as he approached her. "Captain Chun, I don't have adequate words to express what you accomplished today. Your action saved not only the general's life, but probably the lives of my entire rescue team. That was the finest display of combat flying I've ever witnessed." Sarah saluted her commanding officer, but her response was focused on the ongoing tactical situation. "Thank you, sir, but we still have aircraft engaged with enemy forces. What's the current status of Guardian Angel flight and the Apache units?" Colonel Webb's expression became more serious. Guardian Angel lead made it back with significant battle damage. Guardian Angel 2 was shot down, but the pilot was recovered by one of the Apache units before they were forced to withdraw. "We're launching a major strike package to clear the area and extract our remaining people." The successful rescue mission was only the beginning of what would become one of the largest air battles in the region's recent history. Sarah realized that her emergency landing and extraction had revealed enemy capabilities and intentions that would require a significant military response. The day that had started with a routine reconnaissance mission was evolving into a strategic confrontation with implications far beyond the rescue of a single general. But for now, Sarah was alive, the captured general was safe, and friendly forces were mounting an overwhelming response to the enemy's escalation. Sometimes in war, that was the best outcome anyone could hope for. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Phoenix buzzed with intense activity as intelligence officers, tactical planners, and senior commanders gathered to analyze the day's events. Sarah sat at the head of a long conference table, still wearing her flight suit, as maps and tactical displays covered every available surface. The rescued general, despite his injuries, had insisted on participating in the briefing to provide his own intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. General Harrison McKnight looked older than his 55 years, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of military service. He had been captured 3 weeks earlier during a reconnaissance mission that had gone wrong, but his 3 weeks in enemy custody had provided him with valuable intelligence about their operations and strategic objectives. "Captain Chin's actions today not only secure my rescue, but they've also provided us with the most comprehensive intelligence we've gathered about enemy air capabilities in this region," General McKnight began, pointing to aerial photographs that had been taken during the battle. "The coordination and tactical sophistication they demonstrated suggests we're dealing with a much more capable adversary than our previous intelligence indicated." Sarah studied the photographs while listening to the general's analysis. The enemy aircraft formations had been precise and professional, with none of the disorganization or poor communication that typically characterized hastily assembled air forces. Their response time to the rescue operation had been remarkably fast, suggesting either excellent intelligence gathering or pre-positioned assets ready for immediate deployment. Colonel Webb activated a large tactical display showing the entire region where the day's events had unfolded. Based on Captain Chen's observations and the subsequent air battle, we've identified at least 3 enemy airbases that were previously unknown to our intelligence services. The aircraft that engaged our forces today launched from facilities that don't appear on any of our current maps. The implications were significant. If the enemy had been operating airbases in the region without detection, it suggested either a major failure in Allied reconnaissance capabilities or a sophisticated camouflage and deception program. Either possibility represented a serious strategic concern that would require immediate attention from higher command levels. Sarah was asked to provide a detailed minute-by-minute account of her engagement with the enemy fighters, including their tactics, weapon systems, and pilot capabilities. As she described the air-to-air combat, intelligence analysts took detailed notes and asked specific questions about aircraft performance, missile capabilities, and radio communications protocols. The pilot skills were significantly above average, Sarah reported. Their formation flying was precise, their tactical decision-making was sound, and they adapted quickly to changing circumstances. These were not inexperienced pilots flying obsolete aircraft. They represented a genuine threat to our air superiority in this region. General McKnight nodded in agreement. During my captivity, I observed extensive air operations that suggested a much larger enemy presence than we had estimated. They have been building their capabilities systematically, probably for several years, while maintaining operational security that prevented our intelligence services from detecting their activities. The rescued general's intelligence was disturbing. He had observed advanced aircraft maintenance facilities, sophisticated radar installations, and what appeared to be a comprehensive air defense network that extended far beyond the immediate area where he had been held captive. The enemy had essentially constructed a parallel military infrastructure while Allied forces remained focused on other regional priorities. Colonel Webb addressed the immediate tactical situation. We currently have a strike package of 24 aircraft preparing to launch a comprehensive attack against the enemy installations that were revealed during today's operations. Captain Chen, given your direct experience with enemy capabilities, I want you to lead the tactical planning for this mission. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The intelligence she had gathered during her emergency landing and extraction would now be used to plan a major military operation that could determine the balance of power in the region. Every detail of her observations would be critical to the success of the mission and the safety of the aircrew who would execute it. The planning session extended well into the evening as Sarah worked with tactical specialists to develop target lists, flight routes, and contingency procedures for the strike mission. The enemy air bases had to be neutralized quickly before they could launch a larger air campaign against Allied forces in the region. The window of opportunity was narrow, and the stakes were enormous. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the base psychologist, interrupted the planning session to speak privately with Sarah. Captain, you've been through an extraordinary series of traumatic events today. I need to conduct a brief psychological evaluation before you're cleared for additional flight operations. Sarah understood the necessity, but was reluctant to leave the planning session when so much depended on her first-hand knowledge of enemy capabilities. Doctor, with respect, there are aircrew members preparing for a major strike mission based on intelligence I gathered. My input could be critical to their survival. Dr. Walsh was sympathetic but firm in her professional responsibilities. Captain, that's exactly why I need to ensure you're mentally and emotionally prepared for continued operations. Trauma can affect judgment and decision-making in ways that aren't immediately obvious, even to experienced personnel. The psychological evaluation was thorough but brief, focusing on Sarah's emotional state, stress responses, and cognitive function after the day's events. Dr. Walsh was experienced in combat psychology and understood that pilots often process traumatic experiences differently than other military personnel. You're showing normal stress responses to abnormal circumstances, Dr. Walsh concluded. Your cognitive function appears unimpaired, and your emotional state is within acceptable parameters for continued flight operations. However, I want to schedule follow-up sessions over the next several weeks to monitor for delayed stress reactions. Sarah returned to the planning session with medical clearance to continue flight operations, but she found that the tactical situation had evolved during her absence. Intelligence reports were arriving from multiple sources, confirming General McKnight's observations about enemy capabilities and adding new information about their strategic intentions. Captain, we've received updated reconnaissance imagery that confirms at least 6 enemy airbases in the immediate region, Colonel Webb briefed her. Satellite analysis suggests they have approximately 60 aircraft immediately available, with additional forces that could be deployed from bases outside our current area of operations. The numbers were sobering. Allied forces in the region totaled approximately 40 aircraft, and many of those were dedicated to ground support missions rather than air-to-air combat. If the enemy decided to launch a comprehensive air campaign, Allied forces would be seriously outnumbered and potentially overwhelmed. Sarah studied the latest intelligence reports and aerial photographs, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the planned strike mission. The enemy had obviously invested significant resources in developing their air capabilities, but even the most sophisticated military installations had weaknesses that could be identified and attacked. Their primary weakness appears to be logistics, Sarah observed after studying the reconnaissance imagery. These airbases are located in remote areas with limited ground transportation routes. If we can disrupt their fuel and ammunition supply lines, we can reduce their operational capability, even if we don't destroy every aircraft. The observation led to a fundamental revision of the strike mission planning. Instead of focusing exclusively on aircraft and runway destruction, the mission would target fuel storage facilities, ammunition depots, and transportation infrastructure that supported enemy air operations. It was a more complex targeting scheme, but potentially more effective in the long term. General McKnight contributed additional intelligence about enemy logistics systems based on his observations during captivity. They're heavily dependent on truck convoys for resupply, and their fuel storage is concentrated at just 2 major facilities. Destroying those facilities would essentially ground their entire air force within a few days. The strategic planning continued through the night as intelligence analysts, operational planners, and combat aircrew worked to develop the most effective approach to neutralizing the enemy threat. Sarah found herself at the center of the planning process, with her direct combat experience providing crucial insights into enemy capabilities and tactics. As dawn approached, the strike package was finalized and ready for execution. 24 Allied aircraft would participate in a coordinated attack against 6 enemy installations, with the primary objectives being fuel storage facilities, ammunition depots, and command and control centers. Secondary targets included aircraft maintenance facilities and radar installations. Sarah was assigned to lead one of the strike formations, flying a replacement S-16 that had been ferried in from another base during the night. Her wingman would be Captain Mike Rodriguez, an experienced pilot who had participated in several previous combat operations in the region. Together, they would be responsible for attacking the primary fuel storage facility that supported enemy air operations. The pre-flight briefing was comprehensive and sobering. Intelligence estimates suggested that the enemy would be expecting retaliation for the previous day's air battle, and their defensive preparations would be extensive. Allied forces would face sophisticated radar systems, surface-to-air missiles, and potentially significant enemy fighter resistance. This is not going to be an easy mission, Colonel Webb addressed the assembled aircrew. The enemy has demonstrated that they're capable and well-equipped. We're going to face serious resistance, and we're going to take casualties. But the alternative is allowing them to establish air superiority in this region, which would threaten every Allied operation for hundreds of miles. Sarah checked her aircraft systems methodically, running through the same pre-flight procedures she had performed thousands of times throughout her career. But this mission felt different from routine operations. The stakes were higher, The intelligence was more comprehensive, and the enemy was more capable than any adversary she had previously encountered. Her aircraft was loaded with precision-guided munitions specifically selected for attacking fuel storage facilities. Each weapon had been programmed with GPS coordinates verified by multiple intelligence sources, and backup targeting systems provided redundancy in case of equipment failures or enemy countermeasures. As the strike package prepared for takeoff, Sarah received an unexpected communication from General McKnight. "Captain Shun, I wanted to personally thank you for yesterday's actions and wish you success on today's mission. Your courage and skills saved not only my life, but potentially prevented a strategic disaster for Allied forces in this region." The general's words carried special weight, given his extensive combat experience and strategic perspective. Sarah understood that the mission she was about to fly would determine whether the previous day's sacrifices had been worthwhile and whether Allied forces could maintain their operational capabilities in one of the world's most strategically important regions. "Roger, General. We'll make sure yesterday's losses count for something," Sarah replied as she taxied her aircraft toward the runway. The sun was just beginning to rise over the mountains as Sarah's F-16 accelerated down the runway and lifted into the morning sky. Behind her, 23 additional aircraft followed in carefully coordinated intervals, forming the largest strike package that had been launched from Forward Operating Base Phoenix in over 2 years. As the formation climbed toward their assigned altitude, Sarah could see the mountainous terrain where she had fought for survival just 24 hours earlier. The landscape looked peaceful from altitude, but she knew that within the next few hours, it would become the scene of one of the most significant air battles in the region's recent history. The mission that began with her emergency landing was about to conclude with a strategic strike that would reshape the balance of power in the region. Sarah Chun had gone from being a downed pilot fighting for survival to leading a major military operation based on intelligence she had personally gathered under fire. It was the kind of career-defining moment that would be remembered and studied for decades to come. The formation of 24 Allied aircraft flew through the early morning sky in perfect tactical formation, their contrails creating geometric patterns against the backdrop of mountains and valleys that stretched to the horizon. Sarah led her four-ship flight toward the primary target, a massive fuel storage facility that intelligence analysis had identified as the critical node in enemy logistics operations. Captain Mike Rodriguez flew as her wingman, maintaining precise position despite the turbulence caused by mountain winds and thermal currents. Behind them, 2 additional F-16s completed their flight, each loaded with precision munitions capable of destroying heavily reinforced targets. The coordination required for this type of mission represented years of training and combat experience working in perfect harmony. Phoenix Lead, this is Eagle Eye. We're tracking multiple enemy aircraft launching from 3 separate air bases. Count 20-plus bogies climbing rapidly toward your ingress route. Estimated time to intercept, 12 minutes. The warning came from the AWACS aircraft that was monitoring the entire battle space from a safe distance behind Allied lines. Sarah acknowledged the warning while simultaneously updating her tactical display with the new threat information. The enemy response was faster and more comprehensive than intelligence estimates had predicted, suggesting either excellent early warning systems or pre-planned defensive procedures that had been activated immediately upon detecting the incoming strike package. All Phoenix flights, this is Phoenix Lead. We have multiple enemy fighters launching to intercept our formation. Escort flights, engage and destroy. Strike flights, maintain course to targets, and execute as planned. No one deviates from primary objectives unless absolutely necessary. The disciplined response reflected years of training in complex air operations where multiple objectives had to be accomplished simultaneously despite enemy interference. The escort fighters would engage the incoming enemy aircraft, while the strike aircraft continued toward their assigned targets. Success depended on everyone executing their specific mission regardless of the tactical situation developing around them. Sarah's targeting systems began acquiring the fuel storage facility as her flight approached the target area. The installation was larger and more sophisticated than aerial reconnaissance had revealed, with multiple storage tanks arranged in a defensive pattern surrounded by anti-aircraft artillery positions and what appear to be mobile surface-to-air missile launchers. Phoenix Lead has visual contact with primary target. Multiple defensive positions active around the objective. Initiating attack run now, Sarah transmitted as she rolled her aircraft into a steep diving attack that would minimize her exposure time to enemy defenses. Her first precision-guided munition streaked away from her aircraft toward the largest fuel storage tank, guided by GPS coordinates that have been verified by multiple intelligence sources. The weapon impact created a massive fireball that was visible for dozens of miles as thousands of gallons of aviation fuel exploded simultaneously. Secondary explosions followed as the fire spread to adjacent storage facilities. Captain Rodriguez executed his attack run with equal precision, targeting the facility's pumping station and fuel distribution network. His munitions destroyed the infrastructure that moved fuel from storage tanks to aircraft refueling positions, effectively rendering the entire installation useless even if some storage capacity survived the initial attacks. But the enemy defensive response was immediate and accurate. Anti-aircraft fire began exploding around Sarah's aircraft as she pulled out of her attack dive, and missile warning alarms indicated that surface-to-air missiles were tracking her flight. The enemy had obviously prepared for exactly this type of attack, and had positioned their defenses to maximize damage against incoming strike aircraft. Phoenix 3 is hit. Phoenix 3 is hit. The transmission came from the third aircraft in Sarah's flight as it was struck by a surface-to-air missile during its attack run. The F-16 immediately began trailing black smoke and losing altitude, but the pilot maintained enough control to complete his weapon delivery before beginning emergency procedures. Phoenix 3, this is Phoenix Lead. What's your status? Can you make it back to friendly territory? Sarah called, while simultaneously evading additional missile attacks and monitoring her flight's tactical situation. Phoenix Lead, Phoenix 3. I've lost hydraulic systems, and my engine is running rough, but I think I can make it home if I stay low and fast. Continuing egress toward friendly airspace came to response from Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, a veteran pilot with over 3,000 flight hours and numerous combat deployments. The strike mission was proceeding according to plan despite the enemy defensive response. Sarah could see explosions and smoke columns rising from multiple locations across the target area as other strike flights attacked their assigned objectives. The comprehensive nature of the attack was overwhelming enemy defenses and achieving the strategic objective of disrupting their logistics infrastructure. But the air-to-air battle developing above the target area was becoming increasingly intense. Sarah could see contrails and smoke trails from multiple aircraft engaged in combat at various altitudes, and her radio was filled with urgent transmissions from pilots engaged in life-or-death struggles with enemy fighters. Phoenix Lead, this is Viper 1. We're engaged with 8 enemy fighters at Angels 20. 2 confirmed kills, but we're outnumbered and taking hits. Request immediate support. Came an urgent transmission from one of the escort flights that was supposed to be protecting the strike aircraft from enemy fighter interference. Sarah faced another impossible decision. Her primary mission was to destroy the fuel storage facility and egress safely to friendly territory. But fellow aircrews were in trouble and requesting support that could make the difference between life and death. Standard procedures emphasized mission completion over individual rescue efforts, but Sarah had never been particularly impressed by standard procedures when lives were at stake. Phoenix 2, Phoenix 4 continue egress toward home base and escort Phoenix 3 to safety. Phoenix Lead is proceeding to support Viper flight, Sarah transmitted as she pulled her aircraft into a steep climb toward the ongoing air battle. Captain Rodriguez immediately objected. Phoenix Lead, that's not the mission. We're strike aircraft loaded with air-to-ground ordnance. We're not equipped for air-to-air combat against multiple enemy fighters. Sarah was already climbing toward the battle, and arming her remaining air-to-air missiles. Phoenix 2, I still have 2 Sidewinders and a full load of cannon ammunition. Sometimes you work with what you have instead of what you wish you had. The tactical situation above the target area was chaotic and deadly. Multiple aircraft were engaged in individual combat at various altitudes and airspeeds, with contrails and smoke trails marking the paths of missiles and the destruction of aircraft. Sarah immediately identified the most critical engagement. 2 Allied F-15s were surrounded by 6 enemy fighters in a slowly tightening circle that would eventually result in their destruction. Sarah dove into the middle of the enemy formation, firing her first Sidewinder missile at the nearest enemy fighter. The missile found its target and destroyed the aircraft instantly, but her sudden appearance also drew the attention of the remaining enemy pilots. Instead of continuing their coordinated attack against the F-15s, they turned to engage this new threat that had appeared from below. The tactical exchange suited Sarah perfectly. By drawing enemy attention to herself, she had relieved pressure on the F-15s and allowed them to regain tactical advantage. But she was now alone against 5 enemy fighters, and her aircraft was loaded with air-to-ground ordnance that made it less maneuverable than aircraft optimized for air-to-air combat. Sarah's second Sidewinder missile destroyed another enemy fighter, but the remaining pilots were adapting to her tactics and coordinating their attacks to eliminate her quickly. Cannon rounds began impacting around her aircraft as multiple enemy fighters positioned themselves for simultaneous attacks from different directions. Phoenix lead, this is Viper 1. We're clear and coming to assist. Hold on for 30 seconds. The F-15 flight leader transmitted as his aircraft completed their defensive maneuvers and prepared to rejoin the battle. 30 seconds might as well have been 30 minutes when surrounded by enemy fighters firing cannon rounds and missiles. Sarah executed a series of violent defensive maneuvers that tested both her aircraft's structural limits and her own physiological endurance. G-forces that approached the threshold of consciousness compressed her body as she pulled her aircraft through turns that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Her cannon rounds found an enemy fighter that had positioned itself for what the pilot thought was an easy kill shot. The enemy aircraft disintegrated under the impact of depleted uranium rounds, but Sarah's victory was brief. Missile warning alarms indicated that at least 2 enemy fighters had achieved firing solutions and were launching air-to-air missiles simultaneously. Sarah released flares and chaff while executing emergency defensive maneuvers, but the sheer number of incoming missiles made successful evasion unlikely. That's when the F-15s arrived with devastating effect, launching multiple missiles at the enemy fighters who were focused on destroying Sarah's aircraft. The air battle ended almost as quickly as it had begun. The combined firepower of Sarah's remaining missiles and the F-15's comprehensive missile engagement destroyed the remaining enemy fighters in less than 90 seconds. The sky that had been filled with aircraft, missiles, and tracer rounds suddenly became quiet except for the sound of jet engines and the distant explosions from the continuing ground attacks. Phoenix lead, this is Viper 1. Outstanding work up here. You saved our lives by drawing those fighters off us. We owe you a significant debt. The F-15 flight leader transmitted with obvious gratitude. Sarah was already turning her aircraft toward friendly airspace and checking her fuel and system status. Viper 1, Phoenix lead. We're all on the same team. Let's get everyone home safely and call it a successful mission. The return flight to forward operating base Phoenix provided time for Sarah to assess the results of the strike mission. Radio transmissions from the other strike flights indicated that all primary targets had been attacked successfully, with significant damage to enemy fuel storage, ammunition depots, and command facilities. The strategic objective of disrupting enemy air operations had been achieved, though the cost in Allied aircraft and aircrew was still being determined. All Phoenix flights, this is base operations. Welcome home. Medical and maintenance teams are standing by. Initial battle damage assessment indicates successful mission completion with acceptable losses. Well done, people. As Sarah's aircraft approached the landing pattern at Forward Operating Base Phoenix, she could see additional aircraft preparing for launch. The strike mission had been successful, but intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces were already beginning to adapt their operations to compensate for the damage. The war would continue, and there would be additional missions that required the same combination of skill, courage, and tactical innovation that had characterized the last 36 hours. Sarah landed her aircraft and taxied to the maintenance area, where ground crews immediately began assessing battle damage and preparing the aircraft for potential additional missions. Her F-16 had sustained minor damage from anti-aircraft fire and missile fragments, but nothing that couldn't be repaired quickly by experienced maintenance personnel. Colonel Webb met her at the aircraft as she completed her post-flight shutdown procedures. "Captain Chun, I've just received word from higher headquarters. Your actions over the last 2 days have not only saved the life of General McKnight and disrupted major enemy operations, but they've also provided intelligence that's reshaping our strategic approach to this entire region." Sarah gathered her gear and prepared for the inevitable debriefing sessions that would analyze every aspect of the mission in exhaustive detail. "Sir, I was just doing my job. Every person involved in these operations performed at the same level. The success belongs to everyone who participated." But Colonel Webb's expression indicated that the strategic implications extended far beyond individual performance recognition. "Captain, you need to understand that your intelligence gathering and tactical innovations have revealed enemy capabilities that were completely unknown to our strategic planners. The information you provided has already been forwarded to the highest levels of Allied command, and it's influencing major policy decisions about resource allocation and strategic priorities." The rescued General McKnight approached as Sarah was walking toward the debriefing facility. Despite his recent captivity and injuries, he moved with the purposeful stride of a career military officer who had spent decades leading troops in combat situations around the world. "Captain Chun, I want to personally thank you again for your extraordinary performance. But more importantly, I want you to know that the intelligence you gathered and the tactical excellence you demonstrated have strategic implications that extend far beyond this immediate situation. Your actions have literally changed the balance of power in this region." Sarah understood that her emergency landing, survival, and subsequent mission leadership had created consequences that she was only beginning to comprehend. The enemy capabilities that had been revealed would require fundamental changes in Allied strategy and tactics. The successful rescue operation had demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of current military capabilities in complex combat environments. As she entered the debriefing facility, Sarah realized that the routine reconnaissance mission that had begun 36 hours earlier had evolved into one of the most significant military operations in the region's recent history. Her individual actions had contributed to strategic outcomes that would influence military planning and policy decisions for years to come. The afternoon sun was setting over Forward Operating Base Phoenix as Sarah completed her final debriefing session. In less than 2 days, she had gone from a routine mission to emergency survival, from down pilot to mission commander, from individual combat to strategic operations. The transformation reflected not only her personal capabilities, but the unpredictable nature of military operations in regions where political tensions and military capabilities created conditions for rapid escalation. Sarah Chun had proven that individual excellence and tactical innovation could influence strategic outcomes even in the most challenging circumstances. Her story would be studied in military academies and tactical schools as an example of how training, courage, and adaptability could overcome seemingly impossible odds and achieve objectives that traditional approaches might have failed to accomplish. But for Sarah, the most important outcome was simple. The captured general was safe, enemy capabilities had been neutralized, and Allied aircrew had returned home to fly another day. In the end, that was what military service was really about, protecting people and preserving the freedom that made everything else possible.